Redditors who grew up filthy rich, what did you think was normal till you learned otherwise? My family was broke as heck, but my mom was, and still is, a teacher at this really nice private school, which was the only reason my brother and I could attend. Everyone's parents were doctors and lawyers, you get the idea, but why brother and I were being raised by a single mom who had just relocated. We were living in a trailer park in the middle of nowhere for the cheap butt rent. We didn't always know when the next meal was coming. One day, during lunch, the kids notice that all I have is a peanut butter sandwich and a tiny bag of pretzels. One dude says, "Wow, you must really not be hungry." Since I was 6 and just as clueless to any other lifestyle as he was, I just straight up told him we don't have any more food. I had to explain it a couple of times before he realized. Lunch bro sheepishly asks if I would like some of his food. That orange and baggie of Cheetos were the start of a now 20-year-long friendship. I thought until the start of high school that a $100 bottle of wine was cheap. Expensive ones rise several thousands after all. At the end of the year we decided to offer our retiring teacher a bottle of wine and he said, "Don't buy a $100 bottle." I made a joke about how picky he was and made a fool of myself. Reminds me of the movie Meet the Parents, where the guy goes to the local grocery and tries to get some good champagne to impress his in-laws. All they had was mum. When he mentions to the cashier that he was looking for something more expensive, "Well, you could get a whole bunch of mums," is the reply. My roommate in college would order a catered meal for every dinner. Like he'd have a restaurant bring so much takeout that they'd bring it in those aluminium trays and heaters underneath, and a server would stick around to dish out the food and clean up afterwards. It took us a couple months to realize that he thought this was totally normal behavior and was confused why we made such a big deal about it. He saw it as kind of a splurge but not crazy out of the ordinary, until I just pointedly asked Kevin, the server, who else he did this for in the entire city we were living in. Just him. My roommate just looked shocked. The interesting thing was the fallout. This was only part of the reality check that college dealt my roommate. He really was raised to think catered meals and drivers and massive wardrobes were the norm, and he felt deceived. That's how his parents lived. That's how his friends lived. He'd never known anyone who didn't live that way. I mean, it's hard to imagine, but he really did feel like his whole life was a lie and he felt really dumb for not seeing it before. So he really swung the other direction. He rejected his parents' help, started working on his own, got crazy tight about finances, and became honestly annoying about money. But it was a learning curve, so we were patient. It was inspiring to watch someone take control of their life. We never have sympathy for the wealthy, but it was a painful growing experience for him and I was proud. I think this should be upvoted more because nobody really thinks about how much of a shock to the senses this kind of realization would be. I know I still can't comprehend it completely. My 8-year-old came home from school last year and told me that not everyone had a tennis court. In fact, he said, nobody but he had a tennis court in his class. He was amazed that other kids played in the street instead of their own tennis court. The tennis court is old and crappy, but it makes a great play area, paved, and with a 10-foot fence around it. I have many kids who have many friends. It's nice to have a pen to keep them in during parties. I think the term you're looking for is prison yard, not tennis court. This girl I knew was rejected from a law school because her diversity statement was written about her struggle of riding commercial to Europe for the first time. I was poor growing up, and most of my friends were poor middle class. There was this one dude who drove a crappy, falling apart beta car. He was always hustling to and from work, trying to make a buck to afford repairs for his car. We all thought he was lucky just to have a car. One night, after we had been friends for a while, he invited a bunch of us over to his house. Even offered to pick us all up, since no one else had our own wheels. Imagine our surprise when we rolled up into the ritziest neighborhood in our area. Dude lived in a freaking mansion, indoor pool, elevator, the whole 9 yards. We were flummoxed. Someone said, "Dude, we had no idea you were rich." His answer: I'm not rich, my parents are. They worked very hard to get that way. At first we felt bad for him. Freaking filthy rich parents, and dude is working his butt off to afford a beater. Now I get it though. Just wanted to point out, I grew up in a major East Coast city with a good, though sometimes annoying, public transportation network. Having a car wasn't a necessity by any stretch, but it did make life a bit easier. Having a car at 17 of any sort was definitely impressive in my circle. It was one of the outer boroughs of NYC. Interesting to know so many other cities have annoying public transportation. Through the entirety of elementary school I would buy ice cream for my class on Fridays at lunch. The money came from flipping Pokemon cards, paper jewelry, and of course, mostly from my dear old dad. It doesn't seem like much, but we all came from a very poor rural town with one store and one school. Our playground at school was a stretch of coarse pavement. It was like the 60s and the 90s. My dad had just started up his own machine shop in town which employed 10 or so. My slight business sense as a kid coupled with my dad's business sense made us rich. Everyone would call us boss man, which is probably where I began realizing that being a boss man wasn't the norm. My dad taught me a lesson after he realized I was spending all my money on the other kids. If you want to make a lasting impression, let's really give something back and fix up that old playground. My dad's machine shop then produced and installed an entire playground system for our school at no cost. It was that day I knew what it meant to be a good man and that I wanted to be just like my dad. What's funny is that I wanted to be absolutely nothing like him once I hit the teenage years. But now, I'm a grown man and a splitting image of my dad in the flesh as well as in character. I appear to have gone off on a tangent. I'll stop the story here. My dad gets a stonewall look on his face as if his soul is squirming when people are more than gratuitous toward him. I guess it makes him uncomfortable or he's just unusually modest. He's always been the "you would have done the same," a handshake. And that's that kind of guy. I want to show him this thread, but I know he'll tear up and then I will too, and then it's all aboard the crybaby train. That was really cool of your dad and his company to do that, and sounds like you learned the lesson he was going for. When I found out my dad paid off a multi-million-dollar mortgage in less than 5 years, that's when I knew one was not like the others. I grew up dirt poor and, when I met my husband, was dirt poor myself. He came for an upper middle class family where everyone got college paid and they always had new things. My husband has never been unemployed and doesn't understand how someone can be unemployed. I remind him all of the time that when he met me, I was unemployed. Yeah, but you just had some crappy things happen to you. That's all. Yeah, honey, that's how it works. Complaints about airport security. We never got around to owning a plane, but most of our family friends who we would vacation with would share theirs with us. Basically you show up at the local airport and hop right on. If we ever took a commercial jet, we had a prepaid TSA pre-check that let us zip through our own security line. I never understood why people would say they planned on heading to the airport 2 hours before their flight. We never got around to owning a plane. Sorry, peasant. This thread is reserved for the filthy rich only. Flip side, growing up in the projects, I thought that people that lived in trailer parks were rich because they had their own house among many other odd beliefs. My mom never worked, instead she stayed at home and raised each one of her 4 sons in succession. So there was a point when I was shocked to learn that other kids' moms had jobs and didn't just play them, watch them, take them on excursions every day. Obligatory. We were never rich, but I feel like this qualifies. Also, mom got her masters and had to go back to work so that we could pay the mortgage and have health insurance once dad's business took a crap at the beginning of the recession. My boyfriend's family was pretty poor compared to mine, so when we discuss our childhoods we notice some pretty glaring differences. For example, he was telling me recently about how they would leave the kitchen stove on and open in his house for the heat in winter. No central heating air, something I completely took for granted as a kid. I think people start with not filthy rich because everyone looks up and sees people with more money than them. Rich and poor will always be relative. So I can't help but start with saying that while my parents aren't filthy rich, it never occurred to me that it wasn't that normal to have a fully owned house without any mortgage. I thought renting was something only people in their 20s had to do. I thought doctors and lawyers lived in the poor part of town. You know, the guard-gated communities with golf courses in them. I don't think I realized they weren't poor until I got to college. Whoa, this reminds me of when I used to live in Santa Barbara. We were dirt poor college students living in heavily subsidized campus housing, and I had a conversation with a man in his mid-60s who told me he really wanted to retire but he couldn't find anyone to take over his job because nobody in his line of work could afford to live in our area. Dude was a pediatric surgeon. I wasn't the one who was filthy rich, but I went to a fancy private school from 9th grade to 12th grade on scholarship. There were tons of kids there who didn't know exactly how rich they were. I remember one girl complaining about how her parents were buying a third house in Florida but that it cost $1 million less than her main home, which was around $4-6 million. I have so many stories where the rich kids from my school didn't realize just how rich they were. It was pretty sad. Only middle class, but I realized I was globally rich when in the Marines. Filipino folks were taking our trash to fix their roofs. Now I am internetally rich too. I remember going to India and giving about 10 rupees, roughly 10 pence or 15 cents, to a homeless woman. She was basically in tears. It's as if I saved her life or something. That was a big wake-up call. My parents are very well off. When I was growing up that wasn't the case, though. My dad was working and doing his masters part-time and my mom stayed at home. We lived in a very small condo. My mom always tells a story about my much wealthier relatives coming over with their son. He ran around the whole house and came back so confused. He asked my mom and dad where the rest of the house was. Anyways, the point. My parents are quite well off now. I'm older and don't live at home anymore, but I have a much younger sister who does. Watching how growing up with money has made her is painful. She is incredibly spoiled, entitled and quite frankly, a brat. I feel sorry for your dad, having to dong his masters. At least it was only part-time, but that's real dedication to the family. Respect. When my stepdad started college, he went out to dinner with his friends. When they got their bill and were getting ready to leave, he was really confused. He had never had a one-course meal. He was under the impression the next 3 would be coming any moment. My father was a successful chemical engineer, manufacturer and private pilot. I spent my childhood in a gated fly-in community with a fully functioning airport. Not only did we have a garage full of your everyday vehicles, we also had an airplane hangar full of classic cars that my dad enjoyed restoring. World War II-era warbirds, as well as the modern twin-engine planes he used to fly to business meetings. We owned property in Nantucket and St. Martin and we're constantly taking extemporaneous vacations. John Travolta would walk over from time to time and shoot the crap with my dad in our hangar up until he made Pulp Fiction and was slingshotted back into relevancy. I remember having play dates with his son. Jet was also family friends with well-known NASCAR drivers and would spend a lot of time over at their mansions hanging out with their kids, driving around on golf carts and shooting paintball guns. Everyone I knew had airplanes, nice cars, big homes, and what seemed like an endless supply of wealth. That was my normal. When I was about 4 years old, I made a new friend at school and was invited to spend the afternoon over at his house. It was an eye-opening experience to say the very least, and when I returned home, still very confused, I remember saying something along the lines of, "Mommy, they live in a really small house and they don't have an airplane hangar." My mother was slightly horrified at the realization that this was my reality and had to explain to me that not everyone has the same things that we have. Life has changed a lot for me since the 90s. When I moved away for college, my dad suffered a series of mini strokes which subsequently caused progressive dementia. Towards the end he couldn't even tell you what year it was. My father passed away in January and I've been spending a lot of time recently looking through old photo albums and listening to stories. Maybe that's why I felt compelled to share all of this with you guys. Being rich is nice, don't get me wrong, but I would give it all back in a heartbeat just to spend a little more time with the dad I used to know. The man who was the master of his own universe. There was still so much to learn from him, but what I'm left with are the cherished memories of my childhood that will forever put into perspective just how lucky I really was. Discovering that other people's parents didn't have 100 plus properties in their investment portfolio. We had quite a frugal lifestyle, so I just assumed that most middle class had a few investment properties and that's where all the money went. My mom was really into fashion, so I used to get rid of old clothes pretty much every season and have new clothes almost constantly. I realized this wasn't normal around middle school and high school when people talked about having their clothes for years at a time. Old habits are hard to break, but I shop a lot less than she did. At least we gave the old clothes to Goodwill. Watching Sports Center reruns all morning in college and complaining I was bored. A poor kid finally schooled me on the fact everyone else had to work to put themselves through college and become indentured servants to pay off their student loans. Oh wow, still not getting a job though. 1. I thought every family had staff. We had a chef, gardener, chauffeur, 2 nannies, handyman errand guy, took care of the house, picked up dry cleaning, bought supplies, washed the dogs, handled maintenance and repairs, and 2 maids. These were full-time and several lived with us. We had a host of part-time staff as well. When I went to college, I was shocked by how everyone took care of themselves so well, when I barely knew how to tie my own shoelaces. 2. My private school had men of Forbes 500 billionaire families, kids of world leaders, and general global establishment types. If we ever needed something anywhere, someone's parent or relative or friend would have a connection. I just assumed that's how the world worked. 3. Money was always just an afterthought. Nobody ever asked anyone how much something cost. If you just liked something, you got it. Again, interacting with regular people in college was a huge eye-opener. 4. Respect. Everywhere I would go, either with my family or friends or their families, we were treated with what I understand now is a ridiculous amount of respect. It's hard to explain this one, but I think others in the same situation understand. 2. That is how the world works. It just works better for you. Serious question. What kinds of jobs or circumstances allow people to make millions of dollars per year besides some CS and some stock investors? I used to be really poor. I mean like really poor. Sometimes my parents wouldn't eat just so I could. But over the course of the next 18 years my parents did start to make a lot of money. Dad has a building company and my mum runs an online shopping business. Altogether they earn £200,000 after taxes. I guess money really did change me for worse at the beginning. I was spoiled and wanted everything that there was. And my parents did buy me most of the things. A new phone here, new Ralph Lauren suits there, going abroad etc. I never could experience these things as a child, so they tried to make up for it later on. But then I noticed that people started to get jealous of all the things that I had, and me spending money like it had no value to me at all. The negativity surrounding my personality and character is what actually changed me from showing off my wealth to me becoming who I used to be, just with few more zeros in his bank account. We weren't insanely rich, but upper middle class. I never realized that other kids didn't get to travel as much as we did. By the time I graduated high school I had been to 10 countries and countless states. Now as an adult working 2 jobs to keep my head above water, I'm grateful for how lucky I really was. This wasn't me, but a filthy rich friend didn't know that filet mignon beef tacos was not the norm. I grew up in a foreign country where, by comparison, we were rich. Coming back to the US as a young kid I learned pretty quickly having house staff was not the norm. I stopped mentioning those things in conversations with other kids. We had a houseboy. I mean, what position is that even? I grew up pretty isolated, so I didn't realize that there were smart poor people who just weren't told they were smart every day of their lives. It never occurred to me that people could be smart and not praised for it. My family used to be pretty rich when I was really young. Never had to look at prices when shopping. Not anymore though. Everything is embroidered to a certain point. From zebras to toasters. Everything appears to be embroidered when you don't know any better. I can't think of any reason why, but the patterns in the air just really mess with your perception. See, when you're rich and have all this extra money, there isn't any reason to not get personalized everything. So everything else seems like it was embroidered by someone or something. One thing I've learnt in life is that anyone who is well off to any degree believes the following. 1. They are middle income. 2. They are not rich, because they know people substantially more wealthy than themselves. 3. Only the unemployed have money problems. Everyone else earns enough to live on because the world is fair as long as you work hard. I grew up in one of the poorest areas in my state, being looked upon as the rich boy because my dad was a teacher. People living in this area almost exclusively were unemployed or working factory jobs. Little did they know that my father gave most of his pay to the church, leaving us worse off than some of the kids who thought I was rich. Despite this, I knew I was lucky because I was never hungry, always had a roof over my head, even if it was a cheap and nasty rental, and did reasonably well at Christmas, multiple presents instead of just the one. Later in life I found myself working at a bank in their head office alongside people earning very healthy six-figure salaries, who had never set foot anywhere near an average income suburb, who were all convinced that they were average, that they worked hard for their money, and that their life wasn't that easy. Bulls on all three counts. I found it incredibly difficult to not scream at these people, particularly when often their job was to try and figure out ways to profiteer off of people earning significantly less than themselves. Getting best medical care and $100 allowance every week. I got paid more by my dad than I did with my first job. I had a friend whose dad managed a bunch of Budweiser factories, and she sent me a picture of her new car, which was a Lamborghini. I sent her a picture of my 1993 Honda Del Sol, and she then realized she was rich. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.